context for the people currently in here. We have Mouthy Infidel here, and we have Philosophical Zombie Hunter. And today they're going to be debating welfare. And it's just going to be usual format, just back and forth. And at the end of the debate, we'll have a voting poll where the audience who is here for at least 75% of the debate can vote on who they think performed better overall in the debate. So thank you both for debating, and you can get into it if you like.
Mouthy, I don't have like a few minute speech, but I imagine you do. So you want to kick us off?
I actually don't have an opening statement, but I can just sort of
One,
give
two
my
minutes.
case.
Sure, just 1, 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah. So, um, basically, my case for welfare is that in a free market, capitalist society, uh, wealth is distributed on the basis of what's called factor income. So basically, it's distributed on the basis of firstly labor and secondly capital. So if you want to make money in a capitalist system, you can either do labor or you can own capital. Now, this poses an obvious problem because around 50% of the population of the United States, and I can't imagine the number is much different for other countries, neither works nor owns a considerable amount of capital. This is what I refer to as the problem of non-workers. Um, Essentially, when you break down this category, right? Because the obvious response might be, well, why don't these people just get a job so that they can earn money? But if you break down this category further, it consists of people who not only aren't working, but who probably shouldn't be working, who shouldn't in a decent society be compelled to work. I'm talking about groups like the elderly, children, caretakers, students, etc. Um, in the absence of welfare, which uses taxation to distribute income to people who otherwise couldn't earn an income through market mechanisms, 50% of the population would be doomed to poverty, or at least the parts of that, or at least large amounts of that 50% of the population would be doomed to poverty. And they'd be doomed to poverty in virtue of certain features that most people would recognize as being completely morally irrelevant. Um, so basically, my case is that if we don't want to subject massive swaths of elderly people and children and disabled people and caretakers to poverty, then we need some mechanism through which we can distribute income to people who couldn't earn an income through the natural mechanisms of a market economy. And that is the purpose that welfare serves. So that's my basic argument.
Okay, thank you for that. So, if I remember correctly, that 50% that you said doesn't work is made up. You mentioned children, you mentioned elderly people. And if I remember correctly, children of that 50%, children were like 46%, and elderly were like 25%. So 70% of those are making up like the bulk of that people who are not working. The thing is, it's a bit of an interesting assertion basically because children, for the most part, are taken care of by their parents. I mean, I take care of my children. They sleep in the same house that I'm in. Um, they don't pay me, but if only they take the dishes to the kitchen like I asked them, at the very least, it would be worth, it would be better. And I'm currently providing for my children. I assume that for the majority of children, their parents are providing for them, and I accept that some parents don't have like the capabilities to do that as best they could, even though I'm sure they do try. And with regards to old people, I mean, not at the point of retirement, but I'm sure at some point I will be, and I will have a retirement savings, so I will have money saved over from the period of time that I did work, so I'm able to continue not working during my golden years per se. So I'm not entirely sure, like to some degree, I could also say in a hyperbolic way. So, excuse me. I mean, pets. I have a pet. They don't work. And if I don't take care of my pet, they'll be out on the street suffering. And we want to reduce suffering. So why doesn't the government, also pay for my pet to keep, room and board and food? But what I would say is regarding the 50% number, I think it's more accurate to say that the bottom decile of people in America, at the very least, by wealth, and not net wealth as in student loans plus wealth, but just wealth, are between 5 and 7% of the population. And it's possible that they could need caring. I'm not sure all of them do need caring. They do earn very little, but then again, or their income is very little. But I'm referencing a number from Thomas Sowell that was saying that whenever people like compare the bottom decile of society in terms of wealth and the top decile in terms of wealth, the number in the population is around 7%, both deciles together, and it's more like a bell curve in the middle. The majority of the population is like in the middle. So if we're saying if the epistemological foundation of the argument is capitalism bad, 50% people can't participate in it, then like and we're putting pieces on top of that, then it's a bit of a shaky foundation. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, so there's a few things that I want to respond to, and there's a few things that I want to clarify. So I guess I'll just do the response first. So okay, so well, the first thing that I want to clarify is just the numbers. Because I think you said that, like, well, the vast majority, I think you said 70% of, non-workers are children. The vast majority are children, and children are taken care of by their parents. So this actually isn't that big of an issue. Um, I'm
Well,
so
can I just clarify? So from my understanding, I'm basing it on your numbers. Of the 50%, so like the 100% of the 50%, 46 are children, 25 are the elderly. Now, I'm not saying
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
that within those, some children don't need help, or within those, some elderly don't need help. But I would say the majority of them don't, or at least, are in a good condition.
Okay, so all right, so there's a couple things. Let me think about how I want to approach this.
Sure.
Okay, so the first thing that I want to say, right, is that if you want to say that, people would be in a good position even if we don't have welfare. Well, I mean, we can examine this empirically in a variety of ways, and I don't think that this claim really pans out. So, for example, if you alluded to the issue of old people would just save, and so, of
I would,
course,
for example.
yeah, sure. So of course, if you eliminate Social Security, some old folks might work longer to avoid living on cat food or whatever. Also, some might save more for their old age. So the world without Social
Sorry,
Security,
sorry, sorry. I don't understand where we're going. I
yeah.
said that we
So,
should eliminate Social Security.
well, you're arguing against welfare. Is Social Security,
No,
not
I'm sorry,
welfare?
sorry. So I'll clarify. I'm I'm arguing that government welfare is inefficient,
Yeah, and Social
and
Security is government
in free
welfare.
market it would be more efficient.
Okay. So, all right. So that's so you're saying that free market welfare would be more efficient. Okay.
Well, let's I'll tell you what. I'll speak for a few minutes,
Well, you've
and then
spoken for a few
sorry.
minutes.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry,
Yeah. Okay.
apologies.
So no, it's all good. So the first thing that I want to mention is that if the claim is that free market welfare would be more efficient than government welfare, if we use OEC data, we can see that the correlation between the post-transfer poverty rate and net public social spending is an R-squared correlation of 0.4. The correlation between post-transfer poverty rate and net private social spending is an R-squared correlation of 0. However, when you use more precise statistical methods and look at the relationship between the final poverty level as a percentage of market poverty level and net public social spending, the relationship between welfare and poverty reduction becomes an R-squared correlation of 0.64, which is very substantial compared to the correlation between private charity and poverty reduction, which is exactly 0.00. Now, if the claim is that even in the absence, people might save more and, there are these dynamic effects, we can see, for example, as a historical matter, that life before Social Security pensions that we have now was rife with elderly poverty. So in 1960, the elderly poverty rate was 35%. With the expansion of Social Security, however, that rate plunged to 10% by 1995, eradicating 71% of elderly poverty. For 2012, the over 65 poverty rate was about 9.1%. Subtracting Social Security, it would be 44.4%. So we can see, also, for example, we can look at the war on poverty, right? An analysis by the Council of Economic Advisors shows that when safety programs are taken into account in how we're calculating poverty, the poverty rate fell from 26% in 67, which was roughly around when the war on poverty started, to 16% in 2012, which is a reduction of more than one third. So we can see both across countries if we do cross-sectional comparisons, and also within countries if we compare before and after certain welfare policies were implemented. And both of these lenses of analysis indicate that welfare substantially reduces poverty in a way that private charity clearly doesn't. Right. I guess for one final thing that we can look at, right? Another way of analyzing the impact of welfare on poverty is to just compare the market income poverty rate versus the disposable poverty rate. So we can look at how many people would have been in poverty in a certain year had there been no welfare, and then compare it to the actual amount of people who end up in poverty when we take into account welfare programs. In 2018, the market income poverty rate in the United States was 77.9 million people. And then if you look at the disposable income poverty rate, that number drops to 42.4 million people. And if we look at the poverty gap, which might be even more precise, because it takes into aggregate how far away people are from the poverty line rather than just how many people fall somewhere above it or somewhere below it. The poverty gap of market income was $500 billion. The poverty gap for disposable income was $172.6 billion. So, which is I think a 66% drop in the poverty gap. So it seems like all of our empirical evidence points us in the direction of welfare being far more efficient than private charity in terms of reducing poverty.
Mouthy, would you like to drop some graphs in the debate chat? Because I think you threw a lot of numbers and people may not have followed you. And if you have some like graphs with some numbers, people can
Yeah,
follow you a bit more.
yeah, for sure.
Okay, before I go on, I just want to make like a slight clarification. I'm not entirely sure if the numbers of elderly people before you said before Social Security, it seems a bit high, and I'm not entirely sure because I haven't seen the numbers, but I just want to be clear what they're based on because, for example, if when you retire, basically you don't necessarily need a lot of money because, for example, let's say you own the house that the mortgage bills are paid off, and even if you earn a meager amount from your pension, I mean you don't have a lot of expenses at that stage in life. So is that considering that or not really?
Sorry, is it considering what?
So towards the end of your life, sorry, I'm saying that in a bad way. Towards your golden years, sorry, apologies.
Sure.
You've paid off your mortgage, right? And you don't have a lot of expenses. So you have like, gas and electricity, you have food, and maybe even some medicine. But usually, like people at that stage, like even let's say in my country, even £1,000 a month, it's not bad because gas, electricity could be £90 and food, I don't know, like £400 a month or something like that. Then £1,000 a month can seem like very little money to people now, but for a retired person that doesn't have a lot of expenses, that could be a lot. So I'm just trying to see if the figure for how many people were in poverty before Social Security, does it factor that people in the later years in life don't have a lot of expenses?
Yeah, so well, it does factor into that. It's just looking at the rate of poverty for elderly people. So the number specifically was that if you look at like in 1960, the rate of poverty for people who were old was about 35%. And with the introduction of Social Security, that number dropped substantially. And additionally, we can look at countries like Britain, and I think Chile was the other one, where after they tried to privatize their Social Security numbers or their Social Security programs, elderly poverty seemed to increase pretty substantially, such that they had to go back and try and implement new policies to mitigate the damage of that privatization. Um, so yeah, it just seems like within countries, across countries, however you want to analyze it, it seems like government welfare is just much more efficient at alleviating poverty.
Thank you. I'll continue from here.
Mhm. I also sent the graphs if you're
Oh,
interested.
that's great. That's really good. Okay, so I want to add the graph myself. You may be familiar with this one.
Mhm.
Basically, this is the um, money that was spent on like the war on poverty since the war on poverty started and today, and we can see the poverty rate now. I would say that it's important to note that there was already a reduction in like a direction or reduction in poverty in a particular trajectory before the war on poverty, and the war on poverty, the welfare since then has basically kept it more or less the same. Now, look, we perhaps as more populations have been ups and downs, economy's gone up in certain points, gone down in certain points, but roughly uh, the poverty rate has stayed the same. But it is important to mention that during this time, the money that was spent on the war of poverty till today, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mouthy, but it's around $27 trillion.
Mhm. Yeah, so
Oh,
um,
sorry, just like a yes or no, because I have a few things going here.
I'm not I'm not sure the exact
But
number of how
let's,
much
for
money.
argument's sake, it's either between 22 and 27, depends on who you are. So it's a huge amount of money, and it's not super spent very efficiently because obviously the rate is still roughly the same poverty. Now,
Yeah,
I would say
can I just
that,
yeah, sorry.
sorry, if go ahead. If it's just short, go ahead.
Yeah, I have an issue with what you're citing here because while it is true, right, that if you look at the official poverty rate, it's roughly it hasn't changed much. But the problem is that the official poverty rate measures income before taxes and does not include capital gains or non-cash benefits such as public housing, Medicaid, and SNAP benefits. So as a result, families who benefit from tax measures such as the Earned Income Tax Credit or income support such as SNAP or food stamps, these people appear to be no better off than families who are not enrolled in these programs. So, in other words, the statistics that you're referencing measure the effectiveness of federal anti poverty policies using a measure of poverty that explicitly ignores the impact of those same policies. But there was actually an analysis by the Council of Economic Advisors that shows that when you use a metric of poverty that does take into account anti poverty programs, the poverty rate actually fell by about 40% from 1967 to 2012.
So you're saying that the blue line in the graph that I'm showing should be lower.
Yeah, the blue line that you're referencing is just the official poverty metric, but the official poverty metric doesn't actually take into account the effects of the policies that we're trying to analyze.
So it's hovering around, I think, 15%. If I'm saying correctly, what would you say it is?
Um, eh, what would I say the official poverty rate is?
Whatever. So you're saying it's incorrect because X, Y, and Z, and I'm seeing the line currently like hovering around 15% up and down. But around it? You're saying it's not accurate. What would you say it is hovering around?
Currently, I'm not sure, but also the relevant the relevant point isn't where the line is at right now. It's how the line has changed since the war on poverty started. And that's where you're going to get the real major difference between the statistic that you're citing and the statistic that actually takes into account the effects of the policies that we're trying to analyze, right? And on that note, right, you mentioned the idea that the poverty rate was falling faster before that. But I mean, this is sort of on shaky grounds. Well, I mean, this is I guess it works for the statistics that you're citing, but I don't think that the statistics that you're citing for the reasons I've expressed give us an accurate picture. Um, so yeah, um, I guess that's what I'd say.
Well, I mean, I would. I mean, I'm happy to discuss if you're saying that the percentage now is lower than 15%. I would push back a little bit on the trajectory it was before, because it was heading down. Now I would say that it probably would go down. I wouldn't say that it would reach 100% no poverty. I mean, I'd like to be optimistic, but I don't think it would have reached. I am saying there are some policies that are required to lift up those remaining percentages. But and again, I'm happy to, if you're saying that it's less than 50%, and the war on poverty has done better than my graph is showing, I can accept that. If you can give me a number to what you think it should be.
Yeah.
But
So
I would say that regards to the $27 trillion that have been spent on it, that's that's kind of like definitely the amount of money. And you can see that the amount of money roughly strongly has gone up, but the line is pretty much the same. So unless you're saying that this graph is completely off and there's no point, but the 27 trillion still holds, then okay,
yeah.
we can discuss it.
Well, so the problem that I'm bringing up, right, is with regards to the trajectory of the blue line that you're
Hmm.
citing to say that the war on poverty was a failure. The problem is this, right? So eh, when we're looking at the official poverty rate, what the official poverty rate is measuring is one's income before taxes. So the official poverty rate does
No,
not
I
include.
understood, and
Right,
I
right.
understood
So
the
really
principle.
quickly, so if what I'm saying, right, is that we should have welfare because welfare decreases the amount of people who are in poverty. And you're saying, well, no, welfare doesn't decrease the amount of people in poverty. And then the statistic that you cite me that's measuring poverty just doesn't take into account the effects of the policies that we're talking about. Then the statistic that you're citing actually isn't going to tell us anything about the effects of the war on poverty on the amount of people who are actually living in poverty. All you're saying is basically, hey, look, if you look at this metric that completely neglects the impact of welfare, welfare hasn't had an impact, which of course is true, but I don't think that's a lot. That sort of a statistic allows you to draw the conclusion that you're trying to draw from it.
Well, look, I can't throw this away entirely. So I can, I can accept, an increase in population, and we've had a recession, and the line is still like more or less the same, and welfare was there to help people when that happened. I assume to some degree, but what I am saying that at the very least it's very inefficient. Like we're spending more and more and more money, and I don't see like a trajectory going down significantly. It's not hitting zero.
Right,
It's
but
certainly like,
again, you do see the trajectory when you use a measure of poverty that's actually taking into account the impacts of the policies that we're talking about. So when
I'll
you use
I'll
like when you use a disposable income poverty rate, which actually measures the impact of welfare, then poverty since the war on poverty started has dropped by like 40%, right?
no,
And we can
I'm
see
fine. I'm happy
empirically
with
that
that.
when you look across countries, right? There's a strong correlation. As I talked about earlier, the correlation is an R squared correlation of 64. There's a strong correlation between spending more on welfare and having a lower poverty rate. I mean, we can look at the Nordic countries, for example. The Nordic countries have very low relative and absolute poverty rates, and
I
they spend a lot on social welfare, right? And so
Mouthy,
it does seem to be the case that this is the
one second.
trajectory, right? If you spend more
Mouthy,
on welfare,
Mouthy,
then
one.
there's less poverty.
Please just 1 second, because you've been
Yeah,
talking
go
for a
for it.
very long time now, and I'd like to move on. I'll say this. I'm happy for like to say that the poverty numbers are lower than they appear, and you're saying like it used to be 72 million, now it's 44. I'm happy to accept that. I would say though that the price
Well, that's
for
not exactly the same
well,
statistic.
okay, I'm happy
No,
to have like a middle ground here, a compromise, but I would still hold that the amount of money spent on it is still very, very high, and it is very inefficient. And I'd like to move on
okay.
from this point to another point. So
Well, we can move on, but can I just get like a final because really quickly because
if
what
it's
you
quick,
said,
sure.
sure. So the thing you cited earlier, when you said you're willing to grant that it used to be, 500 billion, now it's one, that number was actually not with reference to the impact that the war on poverty, the implementation of the war on poverty has had on poverty rates in the United States over time. That number was referenced to comparing the poverty gap in a certain year, that year being 2018. The difference between the poverty gap when you look at market income and disposable income, which is just meant to show that before taking into account welfare policies, the poverty rate is much, much higher than the poverty rate after you take into account those policies. Now, the charge of inefficiency, I'm just going to
This is not
disagree
a
with,
quick.
right?
This is no
Like
longer quick. Yeah.
I
This is no longer
agree.
quick, Mouthy.
Well, you made a claim about the point that I was bringing
So
up, and then just said you wanted
can
to
we
move on. So
right? But
really
it's
quickly, right? So really quickly, so the claim of inefficiency, I just think is wrong, right? Because you said we've spent a lot, which I mean is true, and then you said it hasn't really been having an impact. That's not true. Your claim of there not being an impact is based on a statistic that just is not suited to measure the impact of what we're talking about. In fact, it's specifically constructed in a way such that it's not going to measure any
okay.
impact of what we're talking
Okay.
about.
Okay.
But when
So
we use good measures, we can find that
okay,
the war
Mouthy,
on poverty
time
has
out.
substantially reduced
Mouthy,
poverty.
please. Okay, let's just do this. We've spent this amount of money. The chart isn't as it's the rate is lower than the chart shows. But we still have some people. We still have people in poverty, and we've still spent this much money. That's undisputable. But the chart should be more optimistic than the one I'm citing because of the reasons you've given. Fine, let's please move on. Is that
Wait,
okay?
but so yeah, but I just want to clear up one thing
Please,
because
Mouthy, we've
you
gone over
said
this.
something. Wait, I'm sorry. Like if you don't want to keep going over it, stop like introducing new points. But so you said this thing about like, well, there's still a problem because we've spent a lot of money and we haven't reduced poverty, right? But that's just I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what poverty is. I think
Okay,
poverty,
I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what.
you're
I
never
have a
going
new
to
point.
really,
I have a new point.
you're never
Mouthy,
going to, I'm sorry, I have
I
to,
need. Okay,
I'm sorry,
I need to
you're gonna have to
pause.
let me
I
finish.
need to.
You're gonna
Mouthy,
have to let me, finish this point, yeah.
why? You've
So,
been talking for
okay,
15
so,
minutes.
well,
Give me a chance.
you brought up a new point, and now I'm just trying to address it. Because your point was that we've spent all this money and poverty hasn't been ended. Well, that's true, but we wouldn't expect poverty to be ended because poverty isn't a stock that you can just defeat in some one off fashion and then we don't have to deal with poverty anymore. Poverty is a flow, right? The conditions that cause poverty, things like people being old, things like children, things like people being born disabled, these things are not going to stop. And so addressing poverty is going to deal with setting up a continuous mechanism that can, in an ongoing fashion, address the flow of poverty over time. It's not, we wouldn't expect poverty to just be ended after some one off effort. So I don't know why that would be a relevant consideration.
Okay, well then I would make the claim that if you look at the chart beneath it, like capitalism, free market capitalism to degree on its own was reducing poverty at the most significant rate. But never mind. I don't want
But
to
that's
gather
not
back and forth.
relevant.
I
That's
don't.
not a
Okay, never, that's not
relevant.
relevant.
That's
I withdraw my point because I
because
don't want
if
to keep going back and forth on it.
whether or
Let's.
not whether or
Can we
not
please move to
because
another point?
well
Because
well hold on
I've
hold
been
on
waiting
hold on
15 minutes.
we can okay we can move on to another point. I just have to
If
address
you want to
things you
circle
say,
back,
right?
I'll give you the option to
Yeah,
circle back.
so
But it's
wait,
just
wait,
we keep talking about
really
it for a
quickly.
long,
I'm
long time.
sorry, but I don't want you to like bring up new points and then I don't address them and then we move on to something
I'll
else,
give
right?
you the.
Because I think these
I'm
are crucially important. All right. If you're chill
I'm
with it,
sure I'm sure
I
you
can
think
just say
they
this and
are.
then you can move on, okay?
I'm sure you think they are, but
So yeah, well
You've
they
just
are,
been
right?
talking, but
Because
just,
you
I'll tell
brought
you what,
up
the distribution of our talking, the time we're
right,
talking
right.
is
You can
extremely
talk.
unequal,
I'm
and
well,
I'm
if
gonna
you
have
want
to
to move
complain.
on, I'm sorry, if you want to move on to a new point, that's fine, but you have to let me address that, and then you can move on to whatever point you want to move on
Well,
to
at
next.
least
But I'm
let
gonna
me have
address whatever
one
you
or
bring up,
two
right?
pointers.
Well, really quickly, right? Because we haven't moved on yet. So
No,
I
we've
just want to
okay.
say,
So
right?
stop,
Oh,
stop,
wait,
stop,
wait.
stop.
I'm
Please,
sorry.
Mouthy,
I'm sorry.
Mouthy.
You're gonna have to let me. You're gonna have
No,
to let me talk, right?
Mouthy. I need a
So if you
moderator,
want to
please. I need a
say,
moderator.
I'm sorry. If you want to say that
I haven't changed
I'm
anything.
sorry.
I haven't
I'm
said
sorry.
anything
You
new.
just I'm sorry. Like I know you really don't want to you really don't want me to address this point, but you brought this up, so I'm going to address it and then if you want to move on, we
Okay,
can move
before
on,
you address
okay?
it, Mouthy, look,
Oh my
I'm not
god.
trying to sneak in a point
That's
and then
fine. Then
not
let me
let you.
address it.
I'm literally trying to move on
That's
from this
fine.
because
Then
I
let me
have
address
other
the
points
point
I
and then
want
we'll
to
move
make.
on. Let me address the point and then we can move on, okay?
But I'm
Okay.
unhappy with
So
how this debate is going on so far.
I would expect that. So we, um, so you brought up the point, right? That well, like market mechanisms, when capitalism was introduced, it reduced a lot of poverty. I don't disagree with that, right? I think market mechanisms are great at reducing poverty, right?
Why do you think that?
I'm sorry, the question isn't, do market mechanisms reduce poverty?
No,
The
but
question,
why
wait,
do
wait,
you
wait,
think?
really quickly. I'm sorry. The relevant question is whether market mechanisms that we're both advocating for, plus welfare systems, will reduce poverty more than market mechanisms by themselves would. And when we analyze that question, which is the relevant question, as I've pointed out, cross-country comparisons, longitudinal studies all point overwhelmingly in the direction that markets plus welfare will reduce poverty more than markets by themselves would.
Okay, so I did say before. So firstly, if you could tell me why do you think free markets reduce poverty? But secondly, I did say that I didn't expect free markets to fully reduce poverty, and we do need some form of welfare to pick up those people at the bottom, right? I believe that was the first thing. But please tell me why you think free markets reduce poverty. What's the reason?
They seem to increase economic efficiency. I mean, I don't know if me
You said you agree, but
I
can
made
you
the
explain why?
empirical, it seems to be an empirical point. I don't know if me being able to give a theoretical reason is at all relevant to this discussion.
I just wanted to know if you understood the principle of why it does it.
Why do you think it does?
Well, I have an idea. I just wanted to see if you understand like economics in the sense where you are
Okay.
very much
Well, this is
for the
totally,
welfare
I'm sorry,
side,
this
but
is totally irrelevant.
let me just it's not irrelevant. Let me just explain why. Because in a lot of times people forget how um, wealth is generated, how scarcity is reduced under free markets, and that's a very important side to the debate. But it's like, yeah, welfare. I just want to, if you have an understanding from the economics point of view, how do free markets generate wealth, which then can help people find jobs and other opportunities and grow their wealth and reduce scarcity and increase productivity and all those kinds of nice things. And then there are still people that need some help, and I fully accept that. And those do need a form of welfare to help them. I just wanted to, if you understood why we have this mechanism of the market that does so much positive for the population within the country.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know why my answer to that would be relevant because it seems like you've conceded the only relevant point, which is that people need welfare, in
Still,
order to,
I said again, even if you look at the chart, the second
right?
chart, I said that capitalism would take free markets would take it down to a particular point, but you still need some form of welfare.
Okay, government welfare.
I didn't say government welfare,
Okay, well, why do you think that
but
private
I'll
welfare?
continue now.
Wait, wait, really quickly. Why do you think private
No,
welfare is an adequate fix for
sorry,
the
it's my turn
problem
now.
when the R squared correlation between net private
I'm very
social
happy.
spending and post-transfer
I'm very
poverty
happy for
rates
your
is an
answer.
R squared correlation of
Mouthy, you're
0.00?
going Mouthy, you're gonna have to bear with me, please.
Okay,
So I'd like to move on to the next topic, which I was been waiting for quite a while.
okay.
So let's discuss poverty now. The extreme forms of poverty, Mouthy, would you say on the high end, would you say would be homelessness?
That's one way extreme poverty can manifest, sure.
Well, sure, but like on the higher on like the high end of poverty, like homelessness would be a criteria where you say, well, look, if welfare measures are working, then homelessness should be better, or should be X, should be Y. Is that yes or no there?
Sure.
Okay, so currently in America, we've just been talking about the war on poverty. We've been talking about the money that's been spent so far and where we're at the moment. currently in Los Angeles, we have 70,000 homeless people, which is roughly, as I understood, half the homeless population in all of America. We have a situation that's been going on, I think, for about 10 years. It's getting worse and worse over time. I'm not sure about the 10 years, could be 7, but something along those lines. And I believe it's mayor, I'm not sure if it's mayor or Congress, Garcetti, I believe it's mayor, wanted to do was he wanted to house the homeless, and he had a plan and he got approval for it from the people to spend $1.2 billion on building about 19,000 homes. Each home initially would cost around $546,000 apartment, sorry. Each apartment would cost $546,000. So far, the cost has gone up to $700,000 per apartment. They've only built 700, and they've been able to house those people, but currently there's not even 19. There's 70,000 remaining people. LA, for example, has a very serious problem with people defecating on the street, have a very serious problem with needles on the street. And recently, I believe a judge ordered Garcetti, during the pandemic, ordered Garcetti that he has to home these people. Now, just as an example of inefficiency and the level of homelessness that we have, because I'm sure people in chat have seen like how many homeless people are on the street and the encampments, and it's a very, very dire situation. Typhoid is coming back as like a 13th century disease that we thought we were over. It's coming back now. And the government means of solving this problem have been incredibly inefficient and unhelpful. Now, there are other initiatives that I can talk about that have been a bit more helpful. So the idea, obviously, of Garcetti was, yeah, we should house them, and let's do this really big project, which I can put my name on and look very political to solve the problem. But it hasn't really helped, and it's a very, very expensive solution that hasn't done anything. So there have been a few other homes. If you may have seen on the news, where there's like encampments of tents, and there's like a separation between it's basically a tent in a square, a white square painted on the floor, and there's some distance between the next tent. That in and of itself costs $2,500 a month for the city, just per tent, just to house. There've been some better initiatives where they have like these small houses. Again, not permanent houses. These like small makeshift houses to some degree, but they're okay. They can have 2 people in there. Those cost $31,000 per bed, and this is on the cheaper end. Now, in 2017, Reason Magazine interviewed a musician in LA that wanted to help the homeless population there. He decided, this is a private free market, he decided that he's going to build small houses. I think it was like either a mix of a container unit and wood, and also a solar panel at the top of the roof so they can charge their iPhones, like with a USB outlet. And to make one of these cost $1,200. Now, obviously, it was just him or maybe some volunteers. This is a free market approach. But unfortunately, the city shut him down and impounded those units. Now, it just seems to me that it's just another example, and this is on the higher end. If you look at the utilitarian point of view of suffering, homeless people suffer a lot more than someone who may not have $100 at the end of the month, and they need that $100 from the government. This is logarithmic suffering. The people are on the street, dying quite frequently, fighting between each other for certain space or the possessions that they have. There's diseases again that we thought we'd eradicated, and drug addictions, and I would assume also mental health, and the government just hasn't been doing this. Now, there have been private organizations that have begged the government to step in, charities, sorry, begged the government to step in, but the government has basically, with regards to the judge that said you have to encamp all these people, they have to house all these people in one way or another, they're appealing the decision. So this is just an example of how the government is inefficient, is actually hurting people, and it's very, very expensive at doing it. Please go ahead, Mouthy, if you wanted to say something to the previous point or to this point.
Okay, so I'm not exactly familiar with the LA housing experiment that you're talking about. Firstly, I'm not even a big social housing guy. I'm pretty in favor of, in fact, deregulating the housing market, lifting restrictions on things like zoning so that more houses can be built by the private sector and prices for housing can go down, right? I'm not even sold on the case for public housing, but the idea that the fact that public housing as one policy might be a bad idea, or even worse, the idea that this one attempt at public housing has been uh, ineffective and costly, that therefore we should abandon the idea of government sponsored welfare as a whole. That seems fairly ridiculous to me, especially when we have a significant amount of evidence that, setting aside the question of housing policy, government welfare on the whole seems to be pretty necessary in terms of poverty reduction, right? Like you can look at the graphs I sent you where the correlation between poverty reduction and social spending is very strong. The correlation between private social spending and poverty reduction is non existent. There is a 2014 paper from the Institute for the Study of Labor titled The Welfare State and Anti Poverty Policy in Rich Countries, which reviewed countless studies on the relationship between poverty and social spending and found that, according to all of the existing empirical literature, quote, no advanced economy has achieved a low level of inequality and or relative poverty with a low level of social spending. There's a 2005 study from the Luxembourg Income Study titled The Material Consequences of Welfare States Benefit, Generosity, and Absolute Poverty in 16 OECD Countries, which found, quote, our results strongly suggest that more generous entitlements to key social insurance programs are associated not only with lower relative poverty, but lower absolute poverty. So, like, my overall case, right, is that we can cherry pick certain types of government policies that have failed or certain instances wherein a certain type of government policy has failed. But if we look at differences between market poverty rates and disposable poverty rates in individual countries, um, differences between poverty rates before and after anti poverty programs were enacted in individual countries, and cross country correlations between anti poverty programs and poverty. Careful studies and more and meta-analyses which have examined all of the existing empirical literature trying to examine this issue, sorry. It seems that on the whole, it's not very disputed that there isn't really any contradictory evidence that I've been able to find that suggests that government welfare is not effective or necessary in terms of reducing the rate of poverty.
Well, I would say I'm disappointed that you're throwing away this particular example because I do think that it's a very
I could grant
oh,
it, and it wouldn't hurt my case. I'm not even a big pro public housing guy, but that
well,
doesn't have anything to do with
I
whether welfare in general is helpful or not.
so with regards to public housing, I'm not sure if that's particularly the solution now because like you could make a case that the higher the prices are for house prices in a particular area, then there's increased homelessness in the area, and there has been studies that there is a connection between that, and you could say that regulation increases the price and therefore the homeless
Yeah,
come in
I'm
because they can't
for
afford it. But
like listen,
I think the problem
I
just
agree. I'm in favor of reducing
right,
zoning.
okay, just a sec. I understand that, but I think the problem there now is that people moved in there from other parts of the country, and they like it there, although the situation that is available to them is better, so they literally commuted to that place. And I think now it's beyond, it's way beyond the, like, we need a bit more housing, because even the example that they're giving here, they're building apartments in prime downtown LA, where they could be, you know, building houses in far cheaper areas, and then just telling them, well, here's a bus, we've got some shelter for you over there. It's a single apartment, just not in the city, and it's cheaper to build. But they chose the most expensive and most luxurious way of solving the problem, and that's kind of what I'm trying to hint here with the previous $27 trillion. And this is an example where homeless is like it's another level of suffering. It's logarithmic suffering compared to other parts of the population. I would at least make the claim. But let's move on. So I think it's best to kind of lay my cards down and say what I'm suggesting. So I'm suggesting to basically get the government out of welfare. And the way that I like to propose, it's a sort of middle ground, but what I'd like to do is basically, if I can explain it, is proportion some taxes to 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 charities, non-profits, group insurance or friendship societies, and some to the government. So, for example, if you have to pay 40% taxes, then you will pay 20% taxes to the government, and the remaining 20% you have to choose of your money that you earn. Remaining 20% you have to choose from a list of different non-profits that you feel that are deserving of your money, group insurances that can help like a large number of people, or friendship societies, which is something prior to doctors. Well, not prior to doctors. It's a kind of friendship societies were in a way like where a group of workers say, well, we need a doctor on staff, and they all had like a friendship society, and they all chipped in a little, and there was a doctor on staff taking care of all the workers and their families. And if I'm not mistaken, it was some sugar plantations on Hawaii still have this concept. But they basically, the salary of the doctor is paid that way. So that's basically what I'm suggesting. And I I'd like to make a point here. I don't know if I should make the point now or should make the point a bit later, but I would say that well, I'll try to make it now. Sorry, you don't need to respond to this point because this is just my opinion, really. But I'd like to make the point that we kind of live in a mixed economy, but basically everywhere in the world. And this kind of mixed economy where, you know, there's elements of free markets and elements of socialism and elements of central planning, and the idea is to strike a balance. But this kind of balance is susceptible to pressure groups and lobbyists um, to influence like more policies towards their particular group, and it's like rife with this. And we can see, like, the government, there's all these pressure groups. They want more money. They want more policies for them. And I think that not relating this particular issue, I think it's creating a lot of political unrest in our society. We have situations where if you don't vote Democrat, then you're hurting these people that we'd like to send welfare to. And if you don't vote conservatives, then these people won't get this welfare and policies. And it's like a life or death situation. The government now is so big that these sorts of decisions have a very, very substantial effect on a lot of people living in the country. Like if I'll just give an example. So the Democrats don't win, then racial minorities won't have access to certain bits of welfare. If the Republicans don't win, and again, I'm not from America, but if the Republicans don't win, then poor white rural farmers won't get this access to this welfare. It's a lot of money, and people realize that, and they're fighting over it, and it's creating this political unrest. It's on a point you need to really respond to because it doesn't really matter. But I
Yeah.
would like to say that with regards to, oh, actually, I would say this with regards to charity. Sorry, with regards to government, and I'll explain why government is very inefficient at collecting and let me just get a graph. I really hope I have this here. Oh, yes, here we go. So, with continuing in the theme that government is inefficient, I'd like to present like a sort of diagram of how much money is collected through the government and how much money is actually spent on welfare. So, roughly in the example, for every $3 billion that the taxpayer collects, and I'll address that small point at the bottom, the government the government collects that money, and 2 billion out of those money is spent on the salaries of bureaucrats and other resources that they need to pay. And I'm talking about massive buildings with massive floors full of people working with salaries and benefits, full salaries and full benefits, and as a result, only 1 billion actually gets sent to people who need that money, and it's just like a product of bad incentives. Now, particularly in that graph, the non-revenue cost, I'll just make a note. It's the economist that made this diagram. He calculated the money. Sorry, I explained a different way. Some of the tax rules are very complicated, and you need people in the business side to figure out like how to pay them and how to structure your business to pay them in a more efficient way. And you also need people on the IRS side to hire very competent people to go after people to pay the money. So the complexity of the laws and the lost revenue of the salaries of the people, it's another 1.95 billion. So essentially 5 billion of taxes, or like lost productivity money, and at the end of it, you only the poor only get $1 billion out of that. So it's another ways of showing how inefficient the government is with collected taxes and how much money ends with the people. And in addition, charities, for example, because they're so much under scrutiny, their expenses usually are around, on average, 30%. It's something between 65 and 75. On average, it's like sorry, it's not it's 65 that they give to the end people who they need it, or 75. So on average, like 30% they take for either administration. People's salary is 10.3, and the rest is infrastructure, so they can pay those people. So if you look at it from a point of view, government
Okay,
takes.
so
Did I talk for too long?
um,
So I'll just
yeah,
finish the last sentence, then you can
okay.
continue. So essentially, government, there's like a 70-30 split. Government, the money that it receives is, it's 70% is, this is just from the top part. 70% is it keeps, and 30% reaches the end people that it needs. And with charities, 30% it keeps for administration and infrastructure, and 70% reaches the people it needs. I finished for now. Continue.
Yeah, so um, okay, so there's a few points there. I guess to address the most minor point, there was this comment about I guess political, or the idea, firstly, that the government doing welfare leads to lobbyists having more power, and that the government doing welfare creates political unrest. I would disagree very strongly with both of these points. I think that if there's one thing that's been empirically demonstrated and that logically we could deduce is very likely to lead to A, social unrest, and B, corporations having more power, it's income inequality, right? So when there's more inequality, there have been studies finding that when there's more income inequality in a society, that leads to um, greater popularity of populist movements, lower social cohesion, higher crime, these sorts of things, which are broadly social unrest. It obviously makes a lot of sense that if there's more income inequality in a country, if money is power, then that means that power is more concentrated in the hands of a much smaller percentage of the population, who can then wield that power to influence the government. So if the major cause of both of these problems that you're talking about is income inequality, it seems pretty straightforward that routinely, according to studies and data points, which I've referenced to you earlier, the best solution for inequality and for poverty is very simple. You take money from people who have more money and you give that money to people who have less money. And that is fundamentally what welfare is. And that's the point of welfare. Now, I guess more broadly speaking, your critique is that you think that the government does welfare in an ineffective way and charity would do it in a more effective way. Now, I'm not going to disagree that there are some aspects of the way that the government currently does welfare that could be fixed, right? I think there are a lot of things, a lot of changes that we could implement to make it such that the government does welfare better, more efficiently, with lower overhead cost, etc., right? Um, but the problem that we're going to run into is if you're proposing that your solution of private charity would be more effective than government welfare, then you have a sort of an empirical burden of proof, where currently, as it stands, all of the empirical literature, data point after data point, and study after study, suggests that government welfare does an extraordinarily good job at reducing the poverty rate and the poverty gap, whereas charity has no impact on poverty whatsoever. So if you want to claim that you have that charity is the best way to do this, or that you have some new model of charity that is going to be more effective than welfare, then that seems like a pretty bold empirical claim that you're going to have to demonstrate in some way. And I'm not satisfied by any uh, or by any argument or data that's been provided to demonstrate this, mainly because I don't think there has been any data that's been provided to demonstrate this. Also, really quickly, I will give me like 30 seconds. I have to go grab something, but I'll be right back.
Yeah, sure, go ahead. Let me know when you're back. Mouthy, did we lose you?
All right, sorry, I'm back.
Okay, you okay, mate? Everything okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, excellent. So I I'm gonna have to push back a bit on the income inequality a little. So I think I think there's more studies about income inequality and crime than there is potentially social unrest. I mean, I can make the argument that, you know, if someone down my street has a house 3 times bigger than mine and nicer and 3 nice cars instead of 2, like it's not going to cause political unrest per se. I really was more specific, and I'm not put lobbyists, corporation lobbyists to one side for a second. I literally mean like welfare policies for particular groups. Like the left will have particular groups that they want to have welfare reach them, and the right wants political groups that they want, and it's like they're all basically fighting over large amounts of money. And I do feel that again, it's a feeling and an observation that this kind of causes tribalism, and it's like someone will say, well, if you don't want to help these people that I want to help you're immoral and you're evil. It's kind of that, but let's move on. um I want to go to a slightly new topic, and then I may make a point again about what I said. Now, I would say that the examples that you gave about charities, you're talking about voluntary charities, and my example here is involuntary charities to some degree. But um, the idea is that the government is so inefficient. My idea, sorry, the government is so inefficient that we take the money we would have given the government through our taxes and we give it directly to charities and group insurance and stuff that we feel is most deserving. So the idea with regards to the tribalism is that we no longer have to worry about this stuff. Like if you want, you know, to send your money to domestic violence victims, and you think that's a priority, and you want to allocate like a certain amount of money from that to that particular cause, you are more than welcome. You don't need to persuade the government to have the right political party to do that. You can do it next month or now. That is kind of the idea. So I mean, if you feel that something is more deserving, you can do that. And I was thinking in my head like a website where you choose, or you can speak to charity advisors who will tell you like, well, you want this, and I can give I can give like and I was also thinking of something like like a holding charity, or like a charity that has money for all these small other charities that people don't really know about, but so you donate to the slightly bigger charity and it gives money to small charities that are not so obvious. But basically the idea is that you don't need the politicians um you don't need to vote for the right political party. You can decide yourself, and probably in a more like the crowd will do it in a more efficient ways than politicians. Or let's flavor in that they could be like slightly corrupt, or in the case of California, maybe the person the company that was selected to build those houses maybe wasn't done in the most kosher way, but just flavoring it. Not I don't need necessarily a follow up, although I'm sure you have a study for it. Um, so that is kind of the point. I do want to show two more graphs, and this is a part of welfare that's a very significant part, so I do have to discuss it. I just want to show a graph of a 20 like the accrued data from 20 years in very different in different industries, and it's categorized at the industries in red are industries that are either highly regulated or highly subsidized, or basically there's a high amount of government interference in those areas. And you can see over the course of 20 years, prices going up like significantly in some areas. I'll just add another one, which is the same one, just a little bit more detailed. And you can see like a trend, like market-based solutions. Like, let me just read that it's so small for me. Like computer software, wireless phones, televisions, almost reaching like minus 100%, like 2% of the price it was like 2 years ago. And this is with inflation. Inflation is mentioned on the top graph, and you can see that over time, if you let market forces carry on, then prices will go down. But in the case of medical services, which is what I'd like to discuss now, prices have gone up, and you can see like there's a trend because of government interference, because of Medicare and Medicaid being price insensitive. They'll pay for medicine now that costs $500 now, and in 5 years they'll still pay $500. These kinds of it's not really a free market. These markets are very heavily manipulated to their detriment, and prices go up significantly as a result. Um,
So,
and so if I could just give like one, I just like one give one theoretical example before I continue. So the idea, taking the concept of the 70-30, where the government is 70% it keeps and 30% it gives, and the charities are 30. So if for example we have a charity that needs to replace a government function. So let's say I'm just doing like these quick numbers. This is completely made up, but I'm just explaining like the idea. If let's say the government collects taxes in the number of 1,000, so it could be 1,000 million or 1,000 billion, but 1,000, and then I have to actually remember what I did here. Just a second. Yeah. And then there's administrative overhead. That 700 just goes to administrative overhead. It's gone. You have 300 left. And let's say the cost of goods is 10. So with the 300 you have left, you can help 30 or 30 million or 30 billion, but you can help 30 left. Now, if you take the concept of 30%, the charities takes that, you have a remaining 700. But let's look at it in a slightly different way. If you look at the charts before, you see prices going down. So let's say that if healthcare was part of the free market, was less regulated and less subsidized, and was able to be more competitive, and prices could go down, the cost of goods sold, I'm saying, just for sake of argument, goes from 10 to 3. So if you consider that the price of medical stuff goes down, cost of goods goes down, and the overhead is 30, the overhead is 30%. In order to help the same 30 people, you need to collect 11.7% of the amount of money from that 1,000 to serve the same number of people. So if you have less overhead and the cost of goods sold goes down, you need 11.7% of the tax money you collected before to help the same number of people under government.
okay,
Okay, I'll
so
let you respond.
yeah, so I mean, there's a lot there. I
Sorry.
I no, it's all right. I mean, I kind of maybe we can circle back to it, but I kind of missed the point about inequality and social cohesion.
I'll tell you what. Let's leave that to the end, because it's
Sure, we
it's
can.
not really a point. It's not really a strong point that I wanted to make. It's more like a feeling that I had.
Yeah, we can
So we can
circle
leave it
back
at the
to
end if
that
you
if
want.
it's not as if you don't think it's as well fortified as some of the other stuff. So, I mean, there's a couple things, right? So, I mean, there's two. I think there are two main threads of what you were getting at, which is that you think charity is more effective than welfare because it has less overhead costs, more administratively efficient, etc. The other thing was a point about how regulations in general and specifically in the healthcare industry create price increases and inefficiencies. So, the first point that I want to make, right, is that I think that when you're talking about the sort of the 30% number that you were referencing, um, I'm not exactly sure where you get this number from. It seems to me to be a general.
I'll give you a
Sorry,
link.
what? Okay,
I will
cool.
give you a link.
Yeah, just throw it in debate chat.
Sure.
It seems like a general sort of estimation of how much of our taxpayer money goes to overhead costs. Um, but that's not necessarily to say anything about the overhead costs of specifically certain welfare policies that I would advocate for. So let me give it like a couple of concrete examples, right? So, um, okay, so one thing that I could point out, right, is there is so let's talk about like social security, right? I support social security. It's one of the things I brought up earlier. Um, it seems to be the case, right, that privatization of Social Security, where it's been tried, actually dissipates a large fraction of workers' contributions on fees to investment companies and leaves many retirees in poverty.
Can
Wait,
I ask a
really
quick?
quick. I'm sorry. You've
No, no, it's fine. I'm not going to stop you. I just want to ask a quick question.
sure.
Is it not the case that Sweden has private pensions?
Hold on. Sweden's case is like a whole different
But they do
thing.
have.
But
Do
hold
you
on
in
really
Social
quickly. I'm
Security
sorry.
get monthly pension?
I need to finish. I need to get
Sure,
through
go
like
ahead. No
one thing.
problem.
Yeah. So, yeah, so there's been a lot of like decades of conservative marketing, right? Um, that basically has been saying the kind of thing that you're saying, right? Government programs always create these bloated bureaucracies. The private sector is always lean and efficient. When it comes to retirement security, it seems like the opposite is actually the case. So, if we look at Social Security, more than 99% of Social Security's revenues goes towards benefits, and less than 1% of Social Security revenue goes towards overhead. In Chile's system, Chile attempted to privatize Social Security. Management fees are around 20 times as high as they are in the US, and that's a typical number for privatized systems. Um, so these fees actually cut pretty hard into the returns on individuals on their accounts. So in Britain, which has had a privatized system since Thatcher, alarm over the large fees charged by investment companies eventually led to the government regulators imposing a charge cap. And even after that, fees continue to take a large bite out of British retirement savings.
Right, can
So I'm sorry, like I'm sorry,
I mean,
you've
just
talked a
right.
lot. I really
I'm not
need to
gonna,
just I'm sorry, I
I'm not
need to
gonna.
I need to continue.
But I am in the
So
middle, and I just
so
wanted to ask
that's
something.
okay, but just keep it you can
Sure.
save it
Okay. No
for
problem.
yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, so um a reasonable prediction for the real rate of return on personal accounts in the US is 4% or less. If we introduce a system with British level management fees, net returns to workers will be reduced by more than a quarter. And if we add in deep cuts in guaranteed benefits and a big increase in risk, we're basically looking at a reform that hurts literally everybody except the investment industry. So it seems like we can look at certain policies where actually government welfare seems to be much more lean, much more efficient, and has much less bloated bureaucracy than attempted privatization reforms. Now, if you want another example of that, we could talk about healthcare, right? Because you mentioned that healthcare costs are largely what they are because of regulation. Now, I don't actually buy that. In fact, if you want a historical counter evidence to this, in the 70s, Ronald Reagan turned very heavily into attempting to cut regulations in the healthcare industry. And rather than decreasing costs, Ronald Reagan's massive broad cuts to regulation in the healthcare industry seemingly had no impact on the trajectory of costs of healthcare, right? And we can see, based on lots of different analyses, that in large part, even if I were to grant that some of the healthcare cost is due to regulation, in large part, it's due to things like administrative efficiency that seems to be inherent to private healthcare systems, right? So if we look at, single payer systems or government provided universal healthcare systems across the world, they spend much less on healthcare than we do. And a lot of the reason for that just has to do with simplicity, right? And administrative simplicity. So, for example, right, if you're in the United States, um, you have to, you are a hospital, right? You have to work with a lot of different, um, insurance companies who all have different sorts of payment procedures and different procedures in terms of filing claims and so on. And all of these different procedures that hospitals have to keep up with create an enormous amount of administrative complexity that costs hospitals an enormous amount of money and drives up the cost of healthcare a lot. Now, under a single payer system where hospitals only have to interact with a single insurance system, this administrative complexity is greatly reduced, and prices as a result are greatly reduced. In addition, under a single payer system, because the government can negotiate with drug companies as a monopsony, and it has much more negotiating power, and therefore prices for drugs and so on will be much lower than in a private system where there's competition. So it seems like we have good empirical and theoretical reason to believe that it's actually the case that a more government involved healthcare system would cost less than a free market one, substantially less. And it seems like all of our cross country comparisons seem to indicate that, right? Now, I'm not going to deny that in some sectors, there are some regulations that might increase prices and have bad effects. But I'm not here to argue in favor of every regulation. I think a lot of regulations are necessary, a lot of regulations are dumb, but I'm not even here to argue about regulation at all, right? I could be the most free market person with regards to regulation and say, and I am in some respects. I think we should get rid of zoning laws. I think we should decrease sort of a lot of restrictions in terms of occupational licensing. But my opinion on regulation isn't going to imply that I have to take any sort of conclusion about welfare. I view regulation and welfare as just totally separate issues. So I don't think that's going to be terribly relevant to what I have to say about this issue. Um, but yeah, so I mean, I'm open to the idea that there are some welfare policies, right, that are administratively inefficient, and there could be ways um, to maybe make those things more administratively efficient and lower overhead costs, right? Now, you'd have to point to which specific policies you're talking about and give me sort of some evidence that what you're advocating for would actually increase the administrative efficiency, right? So I feel like there would, even if you wanted to make that claim, there would still be a burden of proof that I think hasn't been met. But even so, I think that even if I were to grant that claim, right, I didn't come here to argue that every single welfare policy that the government does is optimal. I just came here to argue that we should have some level of government welfare policy. And it's clear that there are certain policies where government welfare is more administratively efficient than private welfare, even if the private welfare was forced and not voluntary. Um, so, yeah, that's I guess all I have to say.
Okay, just give me a second, sorry. Okay, so I'm in the UK, so a lot of what you said applies to me. Sorry, actually, one second. Yeah, so with regards to the pensions in the UK, I'm really, I don't really understand what you're referring to. A lot of the pensions here are private. There are some older government ones. There used to be ones where it was the company was providing the pensions, but the government decided to end that after the 2008 financial crisis. And it's largely private. And as far as I know, if we're talking about pensions here, I'm not sure if I fully appreciate what you mean by social security, because if it's like a combination of pension and helping elderly people elderly people that are they can't. Thank you. That can't pay for certain things, and that maybe the combination of the two. But yeah, it's private. It's mostly private here. I believe in Sweden they're mostly private as well, or entirely private, because the government doesn't get involved in it. With regards specifically to healthcare, um, the reason why I mention it is specifically that, at least in the UK, 90% of the users of healthcare are the elderly, are people over 65. It's a very and it relates to welfare. Um, yes. So it's not really regulations on its own. It's regulations and subsidies, or that the government's willing to be price insensitive about particular things, and there's no competition. And the companies themselves, the pharmaceutical companies, have a very high standard that they have to put prove that a particular drug is not going to have any negative side effects with the FDA. It could be like a 7 to 10 year process. It's hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars just to approve a drug to that stage. And I can give an example of two examples where a government increased the price of a particular product that really affected a healthcare product that really affected things. The one would be the EpiPen, and the other would be insulin. So the EpiPen, for example, but EpiPen, I think the compound inside it, what is it? Epinephrine or something? I forgot. But the compound inside, that's out of patent. But I think the injection mechanism of the EpiPen, that is in patent. And basically, what happened was that the government had a decree that said that basically all government offices or buildings or something have to have EpiPen specifically available on staff, and that just shot up the demand. And the FDA didn't allow for too many companies to sell these sorts of products. I think it was EpiPen and one other one, because they didn't meet the criteria of the FDA, so they weren't allowed to manufacture it, which just increases the price. So they reduced supply, they increased demand, and the price shot up to 600 for two EpiPens. In the case of insulin, there's only 3 companies in the world that can produce insulin. Now, I would like to make a distinction. You can technically buy now insulin in Walmart for $25 a vial. It's just shorter acting, which necessarily means that you have to have a much more stricter diet. And doctors, for example, you mentioned administrative overheads. They don't know the price of anything. They just recommend certain things, or they recommend certain things that the insurance wants them to recommend, or particular doctors group wants them to recommend. So if I don't know if you've seen this, but there was a mother that made like a TikTok video where basically her 9-year-old son said needed insulin. The doctor wrote something. The doctor doesn't know the price. She went outside to the administrative staff and said, "Yeah, this is $1,000 a month." Now I think in America you're supposed to haggle because the insurance like accepts it, and then it's like the price itself isn't the real price. I'm not clear, but it's still a very high price. And she made a TikTok video where she's crying. Now, in the free market world, there is the open insulin project, which is a sort of, I'm not sure if you know the Linux operating system. It's an open source kind of product that anyone can use. It's in practically all Android phones and all servers on the internet, most servers on the internet, and some even desktop. So there's a there's an open source insulin project which is trying to get a longer acting insulin. They're trying to reverse engineer it, find a new molecule that does something similar, and then they're just going to offer it for free, with the idea that for a lab to manufacture it will cost around $7 per vial. So I think these are very interesting free market initiatives. By the way, these sort of open source project is definitely from the free market. We have, as an example, Wikipedia, which the founder of Wikipedia is a hardcore Randian objectivist, free marketeer, and he's offering Wikipedia with a lot of value for just basically a non-profit um, kind of situation. And also, the Ayn Rand Institute itself is a non-profit, so it is certainly part of the free market. And these sorts of initiatives would like bring the cost really interesting initiative that I would like people to consider. I would like to consider two other things in the area of healthcare, and then I'll drop it. Um, with regulations, like for example, um, There's a very, very high regulation for who can be a doctor and which schools can allow people to be a doctor. There's also something that constrains the supply of doctors in the US. And you can have a situation, at least in the free market, where you have grades of doctors, where you have like some doctors that are only experts in a particular way, and it takes less years of studying and less government loans for the university to pay it off and so on and so forth. And it's basically the case right now in the US. The regulations is so high that if the equivalent would be if you want to buy a car, you have to buy a new car. It has to have all these things, and if you can't afford it, then you can't, or maybe like you can take out a loan or something, or the government will pay for it, but it has to be a new car. That's the regulation. Well, if the FDA were to move to the free market, so there'll be like an industry standard, an industry standard within the free market that perhaps serves doctors specifically and says these are the new drugs and these are good for this, and the doctors like pay the fee for it in some kind of model like that, then I would assume that there'll be more doctors, more nurses of varying ranges. So it will be like you can buy a car, you can buy a used car, but it's good for you and it answers your needs and you have access to it, whereas before you didn't have access to it. Particularly the FDA is a very sore subject for me. The FDA has a very, very bad incentive, similar to other government departments, where it just has an incentive to say no. Like if it doesn't have an incentive to say necessarily yes, because if they say yes and something goes wrong, they get blamed. So they have a very strong incentive to say no to drugs. And in the meantime, people don't have access to these experimental drugs. I mean, look, you obviously you can say, they need to be tested, but at least if it was like more free market, then you could have had a situation where the doctors know that there's a certain risk to it. It's at this stage of test, and the doctors and the patients can discuss that risk. Whereas now you have to wait 7 to 10 years to have access to the drug. And I can give another example with the pandemic. Moderna, the US company, on the 14th of January, 2020, some Chinese scientists released sorry, I'm getting off topic. I'll just finish quickly. The Chinese scientists released the DNA sequence of the COVID-19 virus on the 16th of January. 2 days later, they had a design for the vaccine. Now it took another 11 months to approve, and this is again with the warp speed thing that they had to approve things. It took 11 months to get to a situation where they approved this thing that they had in 2 days. At the very least, if it was more free market, said, look, we have something, we've only tested it on 1,000 people. You're at a certain risk. Let's discuss. We don't have that option. I'm not saying like get the drug at a particular stage, but these kind of situation could help people. And in particular, that the thing that upsets me really is the sort of precautionary principle that the FDA takes currently. It has a very, very high opportunity cost that is lost because drugs that are developed, and I realize I'm on a tangent that's not on the subject. I'm just expressing myself at this stage, I guess.
Sure.
Um, if you say no to these drugs, you're denying two new opportunities for people to say, well, this drug works to treat this particular problem, and now we understand how it works. Let's develop like more options to that. So, for example, a real example, they've recently recalled not recalled. They took back an Alzheimer drug that originally they said it doesn't show that it proves anything. They brought it back and improved it. They said at higher dosages it does. And people argued over this that why did they approve or they should have approved. But now you have 10 companies saying, oh, look, this helps Alzheimer's at high dosages and again at early stages. But now they can take that and run with it and develop new solutions for Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's it's a very terrible disease for the person and the people taking care of that person. So sorry, I've been rambling. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so um
You don't
I
know what
just
it's to do with health welfare. Sorry, my mistake. I
yeah,
apologize.
I mean so like I mean no worries. Like I understand there are things that you want to express, but and that's totally fine. I just want to I just want to make the point that well, firstly, you asked okay, so I guess broadly with regards to the kinds of things that you were saying, right? I'm not going to disagree, like pretty much with anything that you just said, throughout like the entire your entire time talking, right? I'm not going to disagree with almost any of that. I just don't think it's uh, terribly relevant to the subject that we're disagreeing on. Like, so I don't disagree, right, that there are a lot of regulations that the government does, and maybe even a lot of subsidies that the government does that cause economic harm, right? All I was saying was that like there are certainly regulations in the healthcare industry that it would be better if we didn't have those regulations. But I think that it's pretty obvious, both on like a theoretical level, when you sort of look at what causes bloated costs in healthcare and then make inferences based on that, and on an empirical level, when you compare the healthcare costs in various countries across the world, it seems pretty obvious that though a less regulated healthcare industry might be better than what we have now, it seems like a more government involved sort of like single payer healthcare system would be better in terms of cost efficiency than both a non-regulated or a more regulated healthcare option. And I mean, we can see this in the fact that, like I said, right, while there may be certain regulations, when we look at the presidency of Ronald Reagan, who shifted massively to trying to get rid of as many healthcare regulations as he could, this didn't really have any noticeable impact on the costs of healthcare, right? The major costs of healthcare, while regulation does play a role, the major costs are things like administrative inefficiency as a result of the fact that we have multiple different insurance industries that hospitals have to deal with, and things like drug costs because we don't have a government that can negotiate with drug companies as a monopsony and therefore get lower prices for drugs. Um, so it just seems like, yeah, that's the only claim I was making, right? It seems like a single
Yes,
payer
thank you.
system would be the most cost effective. Now,
But
you asked about and in terms of the other regulations and subsidies, I mean, we'd have to talk about the individual regulations and the individual subsidies. I imagine some of them I support, some of them I don't support. Some regulations I support, some regulations I don't support. I just don't think that's relevant to the topic of whether or not we should support welfare. Now, you asked me about UK pensions. Um, and I guess the relevance there is that, like you said, you don't understand because UK does have private pensions. Like, I agree with that, right? That's the point I was making, is that the UK does have private pensions, right? But the problem is when we look at places like Britain and Chile, which have done private pensions, it increases management fees massively compared to what they were when the government was running them and compared to where they were in other places where the government runs them. So just to reiterate, right, more than 99% of Social Security's revenues go towards benefits. Less than 1% goes towards overhead. In Chile, management fees are 20 times as high as they are in the US. In Britain, when they privatized their system, alarm over the massive increase in management fees charged by investment companies led to the government imposing a charge cap. And even after that charge cap, fees continue to take massive bites out of British retirement savings, and overhead costs are way more than the government social security program. The same thing is true of Chile, obviously. So, yeah, all I'm saying is that there are obviously many welfare policies that we can look at that, in terms of, uh, in terms of efficiency and overhead cost and bureaucracy, the government seems to do, which are the considerations that you brought up, is relevant. It seems that in many of these areas, the government is capable of doing a much better job than the private sector. So, my position that I've been defending for the purposes of this debate, which is just that I believe in some level of government sponsored welfare, um, that conclusion, I think, is
don't end it yet. I haven't finished.
yeah, that's fine. I was just
So I'll
reiterating.
thank you for bringing me back on point.
Sure.
So with regards to the pension, I mean, I haven't heard this issue. I mean, it may have been an issue like in 2008. I don't
Well,
remember
every
it. I thought
privatization. My point is that every attempt at privatization seems to increase administrative inefficiency, which seems to
I honestly
undercut
have
the
not
point.
heard of these issues here in the UK, and we don't have like another option that other than a private pension. I mean, or do we? Maybe we do.
Yeah, that's what I'm
But
saying.
anyway, so with regards to the NHS specific, so the National Health Service, it is cheaper than, or let's say any European country that has a National Health Service will be cheaper. But you're not looking at it the right way. There's a reason why it's cheaper. They not only bulk buy drugs, they bulk buy the most generic and average or cheap drugs. That's the thing. It's the idea of the NHS is to help as many people as possible. So the majority of people aren't going to be like the severely injured ones. They're just going to be the averagely hurt ones, and numerically they outnumber the smaller people that have more extreme cases. So I can tell you for a fact that things. There's, for example, there's a sort of pot for cancer drugs, and it's gotten down over the years. And basically, these are for newer cancer drugs that they don't that haven't either experimental or expensive, and it's just a pot and it ends. And typically the NHS, I mean, it's very good with things like childbirth and things like if you have a cold, you need to go to the doctor. By the way, the regular GP, which is our family doctor, it's a 21-day waiting period. But the particular thing I wanted to mention is things like operations and things like cancer, the NHS is not very good at. And people have started going, especially elderly people, have started going to private insurance groups to pay for that. And in fact, even in my world, they're giving people like this private insurance through the companies now, that you get like an app to see a doctor to if you want to see a doctor on the phone through a video app, it's in 48 hours. So obviously I needed something, I had to wait 21 days, and I could have just gone 48 hours and seen a doctor like through my phone. By the way, 21 days is still for a phone call. And even in my area, we have a relatively large town. It's almost like a city. We don't even have a hospital. We have an A&E, and twice there we need to take our 3-year-old daughter. Once she had something like something stuck up her nose. She was uncomfortable for a long. She's a young child. We're waiting for 2 hours. We had to go home. It's ridiculous. It's not like a high quality level of service. It's just average. And operations can be cancelled with no notice. It's not just for the average stuff. It's very good, and yes, it's cheaper, but for certain things, it's not helpful. Sorry, I'm getting shouted at to go back on topic. I shall do that. Um,
Well, I think this is partly on topic. If we're talking about, I guess, like healthcare policy as a form of welfare, um, I would just say, um, while it's true that maybe you can look at certain metrics wherein the NHS performs suboptimally, compared to like the US or places with more privatized healthcare systems. Um, if you look at it holistically, this doesn't the overall narrative that I think you're trying to put forth doesn't seem to really hold up. So,
oh,
for
I'm sorry, I am
example,
here.
the
I
Peter
didn't notice it.
so the P okay, yeah, sorry. So I'm just saying, like, if you look at it more holistically rather than just examining specific metrics, it seems like the UK overall the NHS performs much better than the United States' private healthcare system. So, for example, right, we can look at metrics like health status, infant mortality, quality of primary care, quality of acute care, mortality, heart attack rates, or mortality rates for heart attack care. And it seems like on all of these metrics, and then is we can also look at things like timeliness of care,
But
the
are
cost
you comparing
of the
America
healthcare system.
are you
Yeah, I'm
comparing
comparing
America's
America and Britain.
non-free market healthcare system to my one? What are you comparing with? Because the American one isn't free market.
Well, what free market healthcare system would you appeal to?
No, I'm saying I gave you the chart where you saw that prices go up. It's a heavily regulated, heavily subsidized. It's not subsidized industry. It's not free market. You can't say, well, here is free market, and then here is socialized medicine, and this is better. It's not. If you want to compare it to a free market, you can compare it to an actual free market, either LASIK eye surgery or direct primary care.
So,
Let's
but
give an example of direct
I'm
primary
sorry,
care.
wait, I'm sorry, but we have to remember the dialectical context of how we got here because you said, um, well, Britain may be, cheaper, but it's only cheaper because they have lower quality care. And my question is lower quality care compared to what, right? If you're not comparing it to America, and you're just saying that, well, we don't really have anything to compare it to, then it seems like your original point that you made was totally unfalsifiable because you're
You're
saying you're
okay. I
making you're
understand.
appealing to a counterfactual that just
I
doesn't
understand.
exist.
I understand. Well, look, I mean, to some degree, like it doesn't exist, but at the very least, like in the US, you still have a situation where, like, if you need a urgent care, sorry, not urgent care, but if you need like specific care, like in cancer or particular operation, people still fly to the US to have it there. Like the level of care is very, very high, and you could make a case where, like, look, it's high for everyone, therefore it's expensive for everyone compared to other countries in Europe. But even in this case, you still have an
It's
example
good
that
for the people. It's good for the people who can afford to fly to the US, you know? Like the US has really good healthcare for people who are very rich. But if you look at holistically, the amount of people who die in the United States because of suboptimal care or because of a lack of care, it's going to be extraordinarily, like unbelievably higher than the amount of people who die because of a lack of care in Britain or Canada or anywhere else. And I think that
I'll
metric
have to
is more
disagree with you
morally
there.
meaningful to me.
I'll have to disagree with you. People have died here in the UK on waiting lists for operations.
Well, yeah, but if you look at like the amount of people who die in the US, right? I think a Harvard study estimated it to be somewhere around 45,000 people a year who die in the United States because they can't afford healthcare, right? And if you compare that to the numbers of people who die as a result of waiting times in the United Kingdom or even in Canada, it's not even close, right? I've dug into these numbers before.
Look, I don't know what to say. The reality that I'm looking here and the situation in America, and again, it's not ideal. And I gave you the example of averages and helping like more people, but those more people aren't like the high end cases that you need to help out. There's a very
Wait,
different
what
level
are
of
you
service,
referring
and
to there?
like if you have cancer, if you have like a sorry, so like the sickest people aren't being taken care of as well in the UK and than they are in the US. So you have like
I mean that's just you would if that were true, you would
yeah.
expect there to be more preventable healthcare related deaths in the United Kingdom than there is in the
No,
US. But
not necessarily.
if you look at the people in the United Kingdom who die because they didn't get care on time in the United Kingdom, it's just empirically, it's just nowhere near as high as the amount of people who die because they can't afford healthcare in the United
I'm sorry,
States.
I don't accept this empirical claim at all, and
Yeah, I can send you the
I'll
data.
have to bring I don't know I'll have to bring numbers, and I am here, so look, I'll before Raddy 344 completely downvotes me because I'm going completely off topic. I'll go over like my last final points while still hoping to retain his vote at some point. Um, let's see. So I'll just go over the points again. Like I want to have a system where we get government out of welfare. We're still paying out our taxes in quotation marks towards this, but we get to decide what's more important and what's less important, either like through a website or through advisors. And we democratize and reclaim the things that we decide as individuals, the things we decide to contribute to society that are deserving in society. And I would like the free market to then enter this kind of situation where the government is basically a coercive monopoly up till this point, an inefficient one at that. And I'm still very much under the impression that it's inefficient. And I have provided numbers. And in addition to this, Mouthy, I did work for the government on 2 occasions. So I at least have a little bit of experience in that. I don't know with regards to the things about inefficiency, specifically about pensions, but on the whole, government, and I think some people would agree in the chat are very, very inefficient. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to open these areas to the free market, and I'd like to get like some innovation going. I'd like to get to a situation where we stop like guilt tripping ourselves about we need to keep spending money in this and start actually fixing problems. And I'll give an example to illustrate that, but it's just like 5 minute detour, so just please bear with me before Raddy kills me again. So here's an example, completely unrelated, but an example of free market versus government. So Elon Musk recently like took over some parts from NASA and developed a way to travel outside to space in a much more efficient way. So in particular, what NASA calculated was that if they work on a particular project, it will take them $36 billion and 12 years. And they kind of funded Elon Musk. They did give him a few billions, not anywhere near that amount of money. I think it was one digit billion. But he managed to do it in 6 years for $1 billion. And this is the kind of innovation I'm talking about. So the thing that I want to say, why can't we have an Elon Musk, but for instead of like, let's say, in the case of like self-driving cars, why can't we have an Elon Musk, or well, a different Elon Musk that develops AI self-driving submarines that picks up plastic from the bottom of the ocean and collects that and cleans it up? Why can't we have this sort of innovation, for example, for like a Jeff Bezos for affordable pre-packed homes in a social case? So why can't we have like a Steve Jobs for like exciting and innovative higher learning, which is much cheaper than universities? Or why can't we have like a Richard Branson for nursing and care stuff? And I just I really would like us to have a situation. We have this opportunity to innovate and and uh, and develop and stop like this. Just spending this money, and it's just not really improving it. It's basically paying administrative staff. We don't know what's going to it. We can't change it. We just vote a party in like once every 4 to 5 years. But here, for example, we can have a really meaningful effect. So let's say, for example, people there's a particular disease, let's say, not disease, someone who injured their spine, let's say, and there's a particular like innovative thing that if you strap like a sort of exoskeleton around your body, and I just saw it on LinkedIn, I'm remembering, that sends like shocks, light electric shocks through your body, then the person like they were all shaking before because they injured their spine, and now like with the electric shocks they're not shaking anymore. And if we say, for example, this is a really interesting thing, and I have a family member that really needs this sort of research. And let's say we allocate the money that we want from this system that I'm proposing. So let's say you 40% of your salary goes to taxes. It's now 2020, and you allocate most of the 20% to give you a situation where you have $1,000 a month going to fund this sort of research. You only need 2,000 people to fund this research to get to $2 million a month. It's very cost effective, and then you can fund this sort of research that will help a very specific small number of people to get access to this innovative technology. And you don't need to appeal to the government. You don't need to um, persuade the right political party. They don't need to have a committee once every 2 months to allocate this money. You and individuals that either you persuade individuals that care about it, they can fund it themselves. And this is the sort of thing I'm talking about: the free market, the efficiencies, the innovation, compared to like a coercive monopoly that is the government. Let go of it. Don't let them do it, and just have like the free market solve this problem. And there is one other thing in my plan that I forgot to mention. It's difficult to mention social welfare without mentioning corporate welfare. Now, in my kind of system, because we're taking this kind of power away from the government to spending things, I would like to just basically end corporate welfare. It's not a possibility to give corn ethanol taxes, or like pick winners and losers, and like everyone pays 40%, but this one pays zero because they're friends of someone. If simplify the tax system, everyone pays a lower tax system. No one gets any help. No like football stadium is paid for by the city. um, Everyone pays the same taxes, and it's fair. And stop it with the corporate welfare. Only focus on social welfare. Only focus on the innovation. Only focus that you now need 11.7% to buy the same number of drugs that are now cheaper. This is what I'm talking about. Thank you very much for coming to my TED Talk. Over to you, Mouthy.
Yeah, okay. So, I guess in terms of so I guess is this like supposed to be like closing statements or
Yeah. Go ahead.
okay, so in terms of my closing statement, right? Just to as a final note on the point you raised about wait times, right? We actually do have a way of tracking the amount of people who die as a result of a lack of access to healthcare or wait times. Um, the metric is called mortality amenable to healthcare, right? And if we look at this rate, the mortality amenable to healthcare, and we compare it in the United States, we can compare it to Canada or Sweden or the United Kingdom, um, or Denmark or Norway. And in the United States, it is simply much, much, much higher, like incomparably higher than in these other countries that have government-sponsored healthcare systems, including the UK, which is the one that you brought up, right? So really, when people say things like, if we know that, right, anybody who knows that fact but still objects to Medicare for all on the basis of wait times is in essence expressing the concern that lines will be longer than the ones that we currently have because more people are allowed to stand in them. But more people being allowed to stand in them also means less people are dying overall. And I would be very comfortable with that trade-off. And in addition, right, if you found that trade-off unacceptable, there are still things that we could do to increase the supply of doctors if we were to implement Medicare for all. Um, for example, there are large amounts of healthcare workers like nurse practitioners who have all the qualifications and could do the work that doctors currently do, um, if we were to lift regulations that prevented that from happening, which I think we're both in agreement that some regulations should be lifted. Now, um, what I'm fundamentally just going to say here, right, is we can look at certain aspects of the economy. We can look at healthcare. We can look at pension systems. And we can see empirically, right, that even compared to more, uh, to the sorts of market solutions that you're proposing, government is often just more effective. Government is more effective in healthcare because streamlining all the insurance under one system so that doctors don't have to study up on tons of different procedures with regards to making payments and filing claims and so on reduces the administrative cost of healthcare. Having one government that can negotiate as a monopsony with drug companies so that it can get cheaper drugs is more effective in terms of cost than anything the private sector would be able to do. If we look at the pension system, the Social Security in the United States is incredibly administratively efficient, and every attempt at privatizing Social Security has led to devastating administrative inefficiencies that are like over 20 times more inefficient than the United States' system, which has led to a massive increase in elderly poverty. If we look at it in general, right? Um, Countries that spend more on social spending are much more likely to have lower poverty. The correlation across countries is extremely strong. If you look at it within countries, us implementing social welfare programs has decreased poverty to a very substantial degree. Now, uh, again, the sort of cross-country correlations, you're right, are talking about um, specifically non-voluntary charity, or specifically voluntary charity, right? But even if you want to say that you have this alternative that you think should replace welfare in every aspect, right? Because again, I'm not here to say that, I'm not here to argue that literally every policy that the government has is necessary or optimal. I'm here to argue, and the proposition is just that welfare in general or some level of government sponsored welfare is necessary, right? And in order to make the claim that we should replace all existing government welfare policies with the kind of scheme that you're talking about, you have an incredibly high burden of proof to meet, and I don't think it's been met, especially when we can see evidence that in a lot of different areas of policy, it seems like the kinds of drifting towards the kinds of solutions that you're advocating for have made things less efficient, right? And the examples for that, of
Um,
course, I've brought up a few times,
I
Britain,
think
Chile,
actually
etc.
you are right. I actually you're right. I need to add a point. I was just rambling on another topic, but if I can just reply after this, you are right. I forgot to mention something.
Uh, I mean,
Go
I
ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, I guess. I'll probably have to respond to that if
Yeah,
you
yeah,
want to
yeah.
add a
That's
new
fine.
point.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I mean that's all. I think that you need to be able to show that every single policy, every single welfare policy would be better suited for the kind of thing you're talking about, and that just seems to empirically not be the case if we look at things like healthcare and social security.
um, I do think I have proved some things, but with regard specifically to, there is one other element that I haven't. So, and this is could be comparable. There is a sort of health service that's currently available in the US called direct primary care. This is essentially a way for doctors who got sick and tired of the insurance companies and all the difficulties in administrative overheads to just basically offer a service where it's just the doctor, almost no administrative, if at all, and the patient. And typically they compete on cost. So it's just you and and your doctor and what you want to do. Typically, the cost to see the doctor is $35. I'm just giving actual examples.
I'm
To
sorry,
subscribe to the
what are you referencing? What's the program called?
direct primary care.
Okay.
You can subscribe for $50 a month, and then like you have email access to the doctor or something. If you have like a family of like 2 kids and 2 parents, it's $140. And there's like an exact list of very reasonably priced medicines, how much an X-ray costs, how much an MRI costs. It's all very visible because usually doctors don't even know the price. It goes to administrative, and they say thousands or like $200 for an aspirin, and you need 20 aspirins, and so on and so forth. So this model is very interesting because if you don't like the doctor, you can move to someone else. It's very accessible, and even in the case where some people like are still unable to afford this, it's because bear in mind, like people can afford these sorts of rates. Some people, or like more people, have access to these sorts of rates. The people who cannot afford it, the charities can take over because $50 a month is a lot cheaper than thousands and thousands of dollars a month, and this is kind of my point. It's like the free market lowers the price significantly, and then for the public to then subsidize it for like the group of people that can't afford it is a lot easier, considerably easier. So this is like the sort of example I'm comparing it to, where you just have like just doctor and the patient. There's no one in between. The doctor is interested in the patient's welfare. The patient is interested in the doctor's feedback. And if you don't like your doctor, there's nothing stopping you from moving somewhere else. Like you want the best, or you want a second opinion. You want the best advice. You pay $35 to someone else, and hopefully, I mean, if let's say maybe that $35 can even be reduced further, maybe we can have a charity that provides these doctors with MRI machines and X-ray machines in their own facilities, so they can lower their prices and offer these services more cheaply. We have so many options. We have, for example, group insurance against poverty. Not poverty. People are already in poverty, but if you worked and something unfortunate happened to you and you had to pay a lot of money to fix it, either physically to yourself or something else, there could be like insurance against poverty for a large group of people, which you could subscribe into. Or you could have a situation, for example, where um, if you need if people in this group need an operation that costs a lot of money and they just didn't see it coming, then you can have a sort of insurance that the people pay the first, let's say, $1,000, and no matter how high afterwards, that the insurance covers it. And I think some countries
Yeah,
like
but
Singapore do something similar.
wait, I'm sorry.
I guess I'll finish.
What's
I'll
the
let
model
you.
that you're
Yeah.
outlining? What's the model that
Sorry.
you're outlining? What is the model that you're outlining here? Because
The last one
my
was
original, all of my points, right? All of my points against, all of my points in favor of single payer or Medicare for all have been about the inefficiency of having different competing insurance companies. Now, your counter argument was, okay, well, we can do direct primary care. But the problem is, even if you have a direct primary care plan, you still need insurance, right? The monthly fee covers primary care consultations. But if you need additional testing, procedures, or medication, you still, you'll likely be on the hook for the cost, right? So you're still going to need insurance to cover that.
so
Um,
specifically, it's for
so
specialists. You would need the
so
insurance for.
you need to pair, even if you have this kind of a
Yeah, yeah,
direct
yeah.
primary care thing, you need to pair it with an insurance plan.
Sure. You need to pair it with insurance plan, but
Yeah,
the
so
vast majority.
so if that's true,
But
then
let me
I
just
don't see how the invoking that sort of overcomes all of the problems that I mentioned.
because a lot of the things that you would need insurance for, and like high deposit or deductibles, all those things go away when you have direct act. You don't, even the insurance that you have to pay on a month, it goes away, because if the insurance that you now have to pay is for a very specific subset, we're only in emergencies, we're only with specialists, we're only in case of accident, that's a completely different thing to insure
No.
against.
Well, I mean, the fee covers primary care consultations. But if you need like testing, procedures, or medication, you still need to pair that with an insurance plan, right? It's
Well,
still going
again,
to be the
the
system that you're mentioning is still going to be subject to all of the critiques that I made.
Not necessarily, because the testing. So, for example, the blood test, the X-rays, the MRI, are things that the direct primary care do offer, and very reasonable prices for um, uh, generic medicine as well. And that's kind of like
I
the
just
idea that
don't see how this is. I don't see how this is getting around my original point, which is just that there necessarily is an inefficiency, a cost inefficiency that's introduced by um, by having multiple different insurance companies.
there's an inefficiency because of the market, in the government involvement in the market,
No, no,
the
no.
way
There's an
insurance, the
efficiency just
way
in
just
virtue.
just 1 second, I'll explain what I mean. There's inefficiency because the market is very, very mixed. You have you have
No,
large players in the market that
that's just
makes
not the
things.
case.
It
Even if
is
the
the case.
market was
Let me
completely free, the fact that you have
let me
many
just
different providers is still
give you
going to
that.
lead to a situation
Let me
wherein
allow me
hospitals
just
are
to
having to
look,
deal with a bunch of different companies with
one
all of
second,
which have their own
Mouthy,
procedures for payments and
Mouthy,
filing claims.
Mouthy.
I'm sorry, you're
I
just not
let me
like
just finish
getting
the
what I'm saying.
sentence. No, but I
Go
haven't
for it.
finished my sentence for you to respond yet. I'm saying you have, it's not a free market. You have to go through either an insurance company. You have to either go through Medicare or Medicaid. There are very large players in the healthcare market itself that are price insensitive, and they'll raise prices for everything else. And then your insurance has to pay for it. And then the category of group of your injury has to fall in particular something, and you can't stay too many days in the hospital. And administrators will want it to get rid. There's a whole procedure, and a whole infinite reel of legal issues and regulations that you need to follow. And here in this particular model that I'm like just raising awareness to at the very least, is you have just a model with just you and your doctor, and you pay a minimum amount of money that is
Well, no.
very accessible to a lot of people, and you can get the medicine, you can get the X-ray, you can get the MRI if you need to. It's not an arm and a leg. And the people who can't afford it, for charity to then come in and say, well, we need to pay $50 for you, we need to do an X-ray for you, we need to buy some generic drugs for you. That's not difficult to do.
Okay. Uh, okay. I mean, I guess just like I don't want to like keep. I mean, I guess
If
this
anyway,
can just
I've
be
finished.
like
I've finished. So if you want to add to what I just said or close something, that's fine. Go ahead.
sure.
It's been
Yeah.
a very long debate anyway. So
Yeah.
let's.
That's fine. I'll just say as like my final thought on this sort of particular line of argumentation. I've said at the outset that I understand that there are cost inefficiencies that are introduced by having new regulations. But I've also said, and I've given logical and empirical evidence for this claim, that the brunt or the majority of the problem of high healthcare costs are not a product of regulation, but are a product of specific administrative burdens and inefficiency that are imposed by having multiple competing healthcare companies. And that having just one healthcare, streamlining everything under one plan, such that hospitals only have to deal with one insurance company and only have to engage with one kind of procedures for filing claims and so on. This is going to make things more cost efficient. The fact that the government would be able to negotiate drug prices as a monopsony will make things more efficient. um, and so like yeah, I mean, of course there are certain regulations, but the critiques that I'm making are just not addressed by the model that you're talking about. Because if you have the direct primary care thing, like even like I looked at the website, and these people's own websites say that you're still going to need an insurance plan. You're still going to need to have private insurance. And therefore, all the critiques that I'm raising are just going to be equally as relevant to the system that you're advocating for. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess
Stone,
that's all.
up to you, Stone. Thank you, Mouthy, by the way, for doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, are you all set with your closing statement, Mouthy? I know you were saying you were just responding to that last line of
Yeah, no,
argumentation.
that's. I mean, I guess I don't really have a lot to say in terms of closing statements. I think um, my original claim coming in here was just to show that some level of welfare is necessary. I think I've adequately demonstrated that. I think I've shown a lot of data points and a lot of studies which suggest that Having government welfare is more efficient in terms of alleviating poverty than having private charity. And even when we look at sort of the types of non-voluntary charity things that or programs that Philosophical Zombie Hunter is proposing, a lot of the times in certain aspects of policy, these things are also more efficient than just having the government do it, right? And I think like healthcare is an example of that, and I think that Social Security is an example of that. That's empirically borne out to just be more efficient when it's in the government's hands, even as opposed to a non-voluntary government subsidized type, but private sector led program. Now, again, I just want to demonstrate, or I just want to reiterate, because he said, like, well, still on the whole, I think it's more efficient. I mean, that's an empirical claim that I don't think has necessarily been justified. We would need to go through like each individual area of policy and parse that out. But all I need to prove is that it seems like a bad idea, or at least I don't think it's been adequately demonstrated that we should pursue a policy of replacing all government welfare with in every area with the sorts of things that Philosophical Zombie Hunter is proposing. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's it.
Can I have just one tiny statement at the end? It's related to something I said already.
Sure,
So
sure.
I just wanna say that the guy in California that built houses for $1,200, if through my system, everyone in America pays that guy 1 cent a month. That's 330 million people. For argument's sake, it's 3.3 million a month. If he gets 3.3, let's say he builds slightly better houses. Let's say
Well,
he
that's
hires a
because
team. He
it's
gets
not a federal policy. Like
sorry.
you're comparing. Are you
Yeah,
saying
but
that like we would get more money for a
hey
program if
man,
everybody in the United
let
States?
me finish. Let me do my closing statement, yo. Like, just let me finish it. I'm just giving a
I thought
hypothetical
I thought
situation.
I had already given mine, but okay.
So I'm just saying, if everyone in America gives that guy 1 cent a month, it's 3.3 million. He can hire a team. He can build slightly bigger houses. He can get some infrastructure. He could technically solve housing, at the very least, like temporary housing, very, very quickly. Much more than bureaucracy, much more than Garcetti is doing. And that's kind of my point, really. That's it.
Okay, awesome. Just want to thank you both again so much for taking the time out of your days to have a debate on here. And I know it's a bit of a controversial topic, but I hope you guys still had fun.